Rent is up, mortgages are up, prices all across the board are up, and this poses a very big problem for the average Canadian. Hello and welcome back to Politics for Beginners. My name is Clinton. We're going to be trying something different on the channel today. As I kind of queued up in our intro there, we are talking about Canada's housing crisis. And who better to help us along this journey than Conservative leader and opposition leader in the House of Commons, Pierre Poilievre. Poilievre has created a documentary. Well, he's calling it a documentary. Really, it's a 15-minute YouTube video. It is called Housing Hell: How We Got Here and How We Get Out. For those of you familiar with Poilievre, this is a line of messaging that he's been carrying on for some time now, that housing costs are too high, rent is too high, affordability is an issue for Canadians, and he has taken the time, or his team has taken the time, to produce a video on the subject. I thought it would be fun to react to this video as one of the first reactions we've done here on the Citi-Zen-Ship show. In full transparency, this is not the first time I've seen this. I did have a quick watch over my lunch break, but we are going to dive in depth right here together now. I'm going to give you guys my insight, my thoughts on the video. We're going to debate his data, what his key messaging is, and really kind of feel out what his arguments are around why this housing crisis has manifested in such a large way in the Canadian context. So, without further ado, let's jump right in.
Something new and strange has happened in Canada.
Canada is sitting on probably one of the largest housing bubbles of all times.
Something we haven't seen before. An entire generation of youth now say they will never be able to afford a home.
Yeah, an entire generation of youth will say that they will never own a home. And that is something that I hear a lot from my friends, especially a lot from the younger generation. I'm 32, and when I talk to guys who are in their early 20s, yeah, there's definitely a perception out there that home ownership is out of reach. So that is the main topic of this video here. Let's see where it goes.
Be able to afford a home. This is not normal for Canada.
We've got students who are living in their vehicles because they couldn't find a place to live.
Tens of thousands of Canadians could default, Moshe, on their mortgages. And are we looking at that kind of nightmare scenario?
After generations of affordable and stable Canadian home prices, it now takes 66% of the average monthly income to make payments on the average single detached.
That's actually crazy. And again, I'm not going to kind of get into the numbers here because I would, really hope to assume that this guy has checked his math.
Canadian house. Given that most of the remaining 34% of the family paycheck is taken up by...
Let's stop here and look at this pie chart, because this is a beautiful conservative pie chart. If you want to kind of understand a cornerstone of the Conservative Party of Canada, they really hate taxes. So this is not surprising to me that Pierre has, should I call him Poilievre? That Mr. Poilievre, the opposition leader, has framed this as this is your tax bill, right? So one of the key messages I can already see in this video and in just knowing Poilievre's narratives, taxes and the amount of taxes that people pay, this is going to be a really big portion. And he's making it up to, what do you say, 44%? I'm just going to get the number again.
Given that most of the remaining 34%
of the paycheck is being taken up by taxes.
Literally nothing left for food and recreation. And that all assumes that you have enough for a down payment to get the mortgage.
That's the big thing. So he's now going into this conversation about down payments. The Canadian government, one of Trudeau's initiatives was to put in this first home savers buyers account, essentially a registered account that lets you save for your down payment. The maximum you can save is $40,000. So even if you are cohabitating with somebody, I put 40,000 down, my girlfriend puts 40,000 down, we have a maximum of 80 grand to work with. And yeah, look at these numbers, Hamilton's a steal, 62,000, but yeah, Toronto, Vancouver, you're north of $200,000 on a down payment. That's not even the house. That's just, the entry into the housing market. So that's crazy.
In the first place, saving up for that down payment in Toronto now takes an average of 25 years. Not long ago, you paid off a mortgage in that time. So young people must rent, but rent has doubled in the last 8 years. Newlyweds now pay $1,000 per month to rent a single room in a townhouse that they share with 2 other couples. 35-year-olds live in their parents' basements. Rents are so high in Toronto that students live in homeless shelters. Others sleep in their cars or even under bridges. Middle-class people, like nurses and carpenters, now live in their vehicles.
I find that's such an American, and again, I'm going to use the word American to kind of mean North American. It's such an American thing to keep a car. The idea that you're so broke, you can choose a house or a vehicle. And so many people go with the vehicle because if you have a vehicle, you can get to your job. Public transit is so not reliable. Maybe if you live in Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, I've lived in major cities before, and public transportation is great, but let me tell you, in the rural community I'm in now, there is a bus. It comes every hour on the hour, and if you miss the bus, you're waiting an hour, literally 60 minutes. So I can see why people are making the decision to keep a vehicle, because you really need a vehicle in order to participate in the capitalist economy here in North America. But that is insane to me that we're literally at the point where we're choosing between houses and a vehicle because you can't afford both.
Tent cities are popping up in almost every major city and many small towns in Canada, mostly in places that never had them before. And because homeless shelters are overflowing with people, new refugees are now told to live on the streets and under bridges. Like all countries, we've always had problems. Throughout Canada's past, though, almost anyone who got a job could save up and buy a home by their mid-20s. When did all that change? About 8 years ago.
And here we get into the politics of it all, right? I said I did see this over lunch. Poilievre is going to try and now convince us that this is all Trudeau's fault. One of the big things that I try and do on this channel is to keep things nonpartisan. I will never say that it's one person's fault at any time. It's a complex issue, right? Could the Canadian government have done more? Of course. Was this all Trudeau's fault? Would you go back in time and kill baby Hitler? For me, I think that it's never just one person. It's a very complex issue. And that is the one kind of thing I'm going to knock in this, is that he uses Trudeau's face and he uses Trudeau's name a lot. Could Trudeau and his government have done more? Yes. Is it all one man's fault? I don't think so.
It's crazy to think, but in a little under a decade, Canada's housing costs have basically doubled. The rent has doubled. Mortgage payments doubled. The needed down payment on an average home doubled. Double trouble. Think about that. Housing costs have gone up more since 2015 than they had in all the years before that combined.
Wow.
8 years ago, the average one-bedroom rent was about $970. The average today, $1,871. The average needed down payment, about $23,000. Today, $51,000. 8 years ago, the average mortgage payment was about $1,400. Now, it's over $3,500. 8 years ago, payments on an average single detached home cost roughly 40%.
This is what I'm saying. I don't know who does these graphics, but yeah, we got Trudeau's little face dancing around now. It's a little much.
Of median family income. Now, that number is 66%, meaning that paychecks have not caught up with the cost of housing. And we can't blame the rest of the world. Canada's housing costs have risen faster and higher than almost any other country on earth. Depending on how and when you measure it, Canada's housing costs are on average 45 to 75% higher than in the United States. In border towns, it's even more. Vancouver is now the 3rd and Toronto the 10th most unaffordable city on earth, worse than New York, London, England, and even Singapore, a wealthy island with two.
That is insane to me. I used to live in Victoria. I never actually lived in Greater Vancouver, but I lived in Victoria for a while. And I went down to Vancouver for the 2010 Winter Olympics. And I swear that was really when the world kind of woke up to Vancouver. And things in Vancouver have been so crazy ever since the Olympics. That's just my personal experience. Oh, hello, Julie. Yes. You've been all alone all day, and now you need some attention. We're trying to watch Housing Hell, how we got here and how we get out. So let's continue.
2,000 times more people per square kilometer than Canada. All these places have more money and people and less land, yet they are more affordable. UBS, a major global bank, now lists Toronto as having the riskiest housing bubble in the world, with Vancouver 6th. According to UBS, home prices in Toronto and Vancouver have gone from fair valued to overvalued to bubble risk, all in only 10 years. This 2-bedroom property in Toronto's Kensington neighborhood costs the same as a 20-bedroom castle situated on 5 acres of land in Scotland.
No
This
way.
shouldn't...
No way. Oh, man. That's ridiculous. You can get castles in Europe or a apartment in Toronto. Your choice.
be a problem in Canada based on our supply-demand dynamics. Think about it. With our massive geography,
So this is a really big point that he brings up. And I actually really, this makes a lot of sense to me. He goes in to start saying that if you look at the sheer size of, Julie, come on, man. If you look at the sheer size of Canada, we have so much space. We are literally, I believe, the second largest state in terms of geography. So we have all this available land and we have a very small population. If you look at the per capita, and he's going to get into that, the amount of land versus the amount of people that occupy that land, the ratio is really in Canada's favor. So you assume that housing would be really cheap. But again, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. Let's hear Poilievre explain it.
meaning lots of supply, and our small population, meaning limited demand, housing should be cheap here in Canada. We have the most land per person of any G7 country. That includes much land close to big cities where people need to live to work. So why is it so expensive?
That is a really big question. So I don't dispute that. That is a really good point. With all this land and such a low population, we have to be clearly managing our land incorrectly. So let's see into Poilievre's analysis of what's going on here.
Well, let's break it down. A mortgage payment has two parts, interest and principal. Interest rates are set by the Bank of Canada, but heavily influenced by the federal government.
You'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy.
When the
I don't think interest rates are really influenced by the feds too much. That's kind of a Bank of Canada thing. And this is part of Poilievre's argument that apparently a politician can just call up the Bank of Canada and get them to change stuff. I don't know how accurate that is. My understanding of division of powers, division of jurisdiction, essentially says that, the prime minister is in this lane and the governor of the Bank of Canada is in this lane. It's the same line of argument you hear that Poilievre says that, because CBC journalists are government journalists, they must, Trudeau must have them on speed dial. Not necessarily the case. Just because you're government funded does not mean you're government directed.
government borrows and spends, it bids up the goods we buy and the interest we pay. The Trudeau government has doubled Canada's debt, adding more debt than all prime ministers combined.
We talked about that in a video, our debt and deficit, just the fact that, Trudeau made a habit of running deficits from 2015 to 2020. Then the pandemic happened. And we had, opening up of the floodgates of all this money coming out, this public money. The debt has definitely gotten out of control. I do have a video. I can link that in the card, actually, if you guys want to check that out.
Our finance minister has conceded that this deficit spending pours fuel on the inflationary fire.
And I'm going to start with what we shouldn't do. I think it is very important not to make the problem worse.
And then, a few weeks later, she poured $69 billion of new fuel on that fire. For governments to run huge deficits or borrow money, they sell bonds to investors. In recent years, the Trudeau government's spending has exploded, and they've been borrowing more than lenders will lend. So the Bank of Canada has started creating the cash. The money supply has therefore grown
Printing
8 times faster than the economy over the last 3 years. More money bidding on fewer goods, including fewer houses, equals higher prices. But the central bank doesn't just send a Brinks truck to the Prime Minister's office. Rather, they use a complicated set of transactions that they call quantitative easing. Always be suspicious when you hear a complicated word that makes no sense to anyone except those benefiting from it. Here's how it goes. First, the government sells bonds to financial institutions. Then, the Bank of Canada buys those bonds right back at higher prices. Financial corporations love it because they're guaranteed a big profit. But the consequence is not only that the government gets more easy money to spend, but the financial system overflows with cash, which often is lent out at ultra-low rates in super large mortgages, particularly for wealthy investors whose banking connections get them to the front of the line. So as you...
Wealthy investors. I kind of got lost in all that math, I'll be honest with you guys, but I did catch that line about wealthy investors. This is a populist message, tax the rich kind of mentality. It's interesting Poilievre's taken that approach too. Home purchases based on investors. Very interesting.
You can see in this chart from the Bank of Canada itself, investors doubled the number of home purchases they made in just over a year. The black line, well, it shows when the quantitative easing.
The black line. It starts quantitative easing. What else happened in 2020? What else could have been a factor? I wonder. 2020. I don't know. Nothing comes to mind.
Began. Cause? Money printing. Effect? Housing inflation. So the government deficits forced the Bank of Canada to boost interest rates to push inflation back down. Former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley put it this way.
It appears that fiscal and monetary policy are not aligned. And the importance of that alignment is key. We're still running very large fiscal deficits. The government still talks about how much they're going to continue to spend. And this is a bit like driving your car with one foot on the gas and the other on the brake.
Common sense solution, stop the inflationary deficits so the bank doesn't have to raise the rates. That means cutting government waste and capping government spending with a dollar-for-dollar law that forces politicians to find a dollar of savings for each new dollar of spending.
That's an interesting point. I don't know if I would go as extreme as dollar to dollar. So, he's saying if you want to spend $1, you got to cut $1. But at least mapping the flow of money and educating the citizens around where this money is going. Yeah, I'd vibe with that.
By getting back towards a balanced budget, we'll bring down inflation and interest rates on your mortgage payment. So that helps address the interest cost of the mortgage payment. What about the principal, which is determined by the home price? Canadian prices, which are so much higher than in other countries, are determined by supply and demand. We have the fewest houses per capita in the G7, even though we have the most land to build on. We have fewer houses per capita today than we did 8 years ago, as population has outgrown home building. Canada built fewer homes last year than it built in 1972.
That is insane. And again, I'm kind of taking it on face value that statistic is true. But he just said that in 1972, we built more houses than in 2022. That's insane. What has happened to our society? South Park just did a whole episode on how the tradesmen are the new billionaires. And I can totally see it, because the fact that nobody knows how to build anything anymore. And we've gone from a society of manufacturing and building to a society of services. And not to restoke the flames of white collar versus blue collar, but, oh man, if that's true, that's a really sad statistic.
50 years ago, consider this. In 1972, Canada's population was 22 million. And we built about 230,000 homes. In 2022, Canada's population was 39 million, and we built about 220,000 homes.
That's crazy.
In other words, far more people, far less home building.
Far more people, far less home building. And that's a big problem. You know, when you want more houses, you want more available houses, you want to control the price of housing, it starts with the supply level.
And the shortfall is only growing. Canada's housing agency, the CMHC, predicts a 32% drop in home building this year, as higher interest rates and red tape are blocking construction. The agency projects that we will be 3.5 million homes short by the year 2030, based on our current estimates of building and population growth. Where will those 3.5 million families live? More importantly, why can't we build homes to house them? What do you think is the most expensive thing that goes into a new house in, say, Vancouver? Is it labor? Lumber? Land? Nope. Government. A City House study.
And again, we get to one of Poilievre's big talking points. Axe the tax. This whole idea that, and again, he's going to kind of get into it, but the idea that it's not housing, it's not the actual building costs, it's not labor costs, it is government nonsense that is getting in the way, that is not only stalling building in terms of how long it takes for these projects to get built, but also the costs are increasing. So more time and more money.
He added up all the costs of labor, materials, land, and profit needed to build a home and compared it to the final sale price. In Vancouver, the gap was nearly $1.3 million. That gap, or as I call it, the gatekeeper gap, is the cost of government permit delays, changing rules, pricey consultants, lawyers' fees, charges, taxes, etc. Another study showed Montreal's city government blocked 24,000 homes. The city of Winnipeg, meanwhile, just lost a lawsuit because it tried to block the construction of nearly 2,000 homes right next to a newly built transit system.
That's a good point. So, he's out here saying that, it's all Trudeau's fault. Obviously, Poilievre is going to attack his opponent. But a lot of the decision-making happens at the municipal level. It's the city of Montreal. It's the city of Winnipeg. It's the city of Vancouver, and that's the big problem with federalism. And what I kind of came down to, or what I started off this video saying, is that, yes, the federal government plays a large role and bears a lot of responsibility, but they're not the sole problem here. And in federalism, we have federal governments, provincial governments, and municipal governments. And the municipal governments and this whole idea of not in my neighborhood, that definitely has an impact.
An example of the mindless red tape costs, the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force report stated that, quote, minimum parking requirements add as much as $165,000 to the cost of a new home, even as demand for parking spaces is falling, and that one of the strongest signs that our approval process is not working. Of 35 OECD countries, only the Slovak Republic takes longer than Canada to approve a building project. The UK and the US approve projects 3 times faster without sacrificing quality or safety. Government development charges in Ontario can be as much as $135,000 per home, and some have increased as much as 900% in less than 20 years.
And you do hear that from builders and stuff. That's one of the biggest critiques, is that, it's just this red tape. It not only about cost, but driving up time. And I can't really say definitively. I'm not a builder. I'm not Bob over here. But I have heard that. There's definitely the word on the street.
Charges don't include governmental costs like taxes, delays, and uncertainty. Worst of all, the Trudeau government has encouraged this gatekeeping with billions of dollars in new grants to the same city governments that block home building. He is literally funding the hiring of more gatekeepers to stand in the way of building homes. So you lose 2 ways. You pay more in taxes so that you can pay more for a home.
And again, Poilievre trying to bring it back to that piece. It's a very interesting structured documentary, or video, I should say. Now he's gotten me calling it a documentary. Very interesting video that he's really pulling at your heartstrings a little bit, saying you're essentially getting hit from both fronts. You know, you're paying more into taxes, and then that tax money is going to the municipal level to hire all these bureaucrats who are essentially shoving more nonsense and more red tape in you. So it's a very interesting way he's framing this. And I can see that he has the little guy in mind. This is definitely for you and me. The same for those big city people who work on the 80th floor. This is definitely for the little guy, this video here.
So what if we incentivized good behavior rather than reinforcing the bad? Here's how we can. The federal government spends about $4.5 billion on direct and continuous municipal infrastructure transfers. Big city politicians care about getting that money more than anything else. They'll only permit more home building faster if their federal money depends on it. My common sense plan?
Oh, here we go. Here's, okay, so we're getting to the end of the video here. Thank you guys for sticking around this long, if you're still with me here. We're getting into his big points. So, okay, we'll let him explain it here.
1. Require big cities to complete 15% more home building per year as a condition of getting federal infrastructure money. 2. Give building bonuses to cities that exceed the 15% target. Dollars should be based on housing completions, not promises. 3. Require federally funded transit stations be permitted for high-density apartments all around it, and withhold federal transit grants until the apartments are built and occupied. 4. Sell off 15% of federal buildings and thousands of acres of surplus federal land.
Okay, so the big points that are jumping out at me here are the words completion and the word occupied. This idea that right now his argument is that the federal government just sends money, kind of no strings attached, that we want you to do this, but it's not actually getting done. This money is not actually satisfying what it was meant to satisfy. So Poilievre essentially says that I want to put conditions on this, that if you want this money, projects have to be complete. We're going to put a metric behind it. I want to see at least 15% more home building per year. That's what we call a SMART goal, because it's strategic, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound. If you will get bonuses if you exceed this 15% target, and money will only be delivered when not only it's built, but it's occupied. And again, that's a very interesting point, that we're not just building homes for the sake of building homes. We're building homes for the purpose of putting people in those homes. Lastly, again, that fourth point, the idea that we're going to sell off federal buildings and sell off federal land, that doesn't surprise me. It's a very conservative idea. Slash and burn, we're going to get rid of, we're going to take this big behemoth government and we're going to strip it back. We're going to make it lean. Very conservative idea.
Suitable for housing. Instead of funding promises, the federal government should fund results. It should link the number of federal dollars big city governments get for infrastructure to the number of new homes completed. Money should flow after the keys are indoors. Pay for promises, get more promises. Pay for results, get results. The good news is we have examples of success. Look at the Squamish Nation and their development in Vancouver. They've approved and begun building on 6,000 apartments and condos on just 10.4 acres of land. That's nearly 600 homes per acre. Now, they could do this because, being a reserve, they did not need to follow Vancouver City Hall rules. That means 6,000 hardworking local residents will get a place to live because there were no city gatekeepers standing in the way.
And then he gives us an actual example, which is nice. This has been a lot of theory, a lot of numbers, a lot of data, but whoever put together this film clearly knows, Poilievre obviously was the narrator here, but whoever actually structured this film, it's a good little narrative we've got, because now we're in the final minute here and we're closing on a real world example. And what's the moral of the story? If you remove government from the equation, things actually get done. What a happy moral, eh?
But let's bring this back. This isn't just about the price of a home. It is not just about numbers. This is people's lives.
That's what I said.
If we don't fix this, we could have hundreds of thousands of middle-class people living on the street in Canada. A home is your financial future. A home is the place you're secure. A home is where you raise a family.
I like how he starts off with saying a home is your financial future. And that is true for a lot of people. A lot of people plan to buy a home when they're young. That home will increase in value over the course of their life. They will then sell and then downsize and live off of essentially the windfall of their home. That's such a weird thing to start with, though. Again, it's a very money perspective. I think a home is, where you lay your head down. It's where you raise your family. And he does get into that point, but it's funny that he starts with the financial piece.
A home is at the center of everything you do in your life. If the government stands in the way of you getting a home, it stands in the way of your entire life going forward. The good news is, housing costs were not like this before Justin Trudeau, and they won't be like this after he's gone. We can borrow less and build more. We have all the natural advantages: abundant land, labor, and lumber. The best carpenters, plumbers, framers, and electricians and home builders.
Have really good tradesmen
We just
here.
need to get the gatekeepers out of their way and yours so that we can bring it home.
Bring it home. Okay. So what do we think of that? What did you think of Poilievre's video? The big things that kind of stuck out to me was, off the top, just that it's not normal to not be a homeowner. Thought that was kind of strange, the idea that, just if you don't own a home, does that make it not a home? This place that I'm in right now, yeah, I pay a rent check. It's not mine technically, but it's a place that I lay my head. I quite like it. I'm quite fond of it. And even as Poilievre said at the end of it all, a home is really the center, the foundation of your whole life. It's far more than brick and mortar. It's your home. So regardless if you own it or you rent it, housing is a very important topic for all of us. And, I got to give it to Poilievre. Regardless of what you think of him personally, I thought this was a very timely video and a very important subject. So I thank all of you guys who stuck around and, let me add my 2 cents into it. That was clearly a campaign. You can tell that there's definitely a mano against Trudeau and Poilievre. And frankly, I don't really want to get into the middle of the shoving match. To me, the more important thing is the battle of ideas. The crux of the video and the crux of the argument that Poilievre was putting forward, to me at least, was this idea of bureaucracy, or as he called it, the gatekeepers. To what extent does getting rid of the bureaucracy actually solve this current problem around housing? On one side of it, I can relate to the idea that too many cooks in the kitchen do create problems. On the other side of it, does a deregulated market solve all of our problems? So, yeah, I am kind of two minds on this. This is why I love these little political videos and I love these discussions, because it gets my brain kind of firing. I would love to hear what you guys think, though. I've rambled clearly long enough in this video, so if you are still here watching this, thank you so much. If you enjoyed this reaction and would like to see more, give it a like, give it a subscribe. But anyway, for anyone out there who believes that a home is worth fighting for, I hope you related with this conversation. I myself am going to be going to bed pretty soon in my home. I am very fortunate that I have this little piece of heaven here on the West Coast. I know that a lot of people don't have this, and just the sheer fact that having a place to sleep that is dry and safe has become something of privilege in this country is deeply sad. My heart really does go out to everybody out there who is struggling to even maintain the base. With that, I will wish you guys a very good night. My name is Clinton, You have been watching Politics for Beginners, and I will see you in the next video.